Hi, Heather. So we both had an informed consent from Texas, so I thought that was pretty interesting. Um, you mentioned that yours listed licensed professionals, but it didn't have any details about that. Mine was similar. Um, it didn't really have the credentials that they that the counselors had. It didn't mention how many counselors worked there, any contact information. It just had the contact information for the actual counseling center. So I thought it was pretty weird, especially how you mentioned that licensure and restrictions should be on the informed consent form. Um, so both of our informed consent forms lacked that. So I thought that was pretty interesting because the rest of the stuff that was required for these consent forms was listed except for those details. Um, so I just thought it was a little weird. Your informed consent form mentioned cancellation. Mine did too. It went over payments. Mine did too. You mentioned that the sessions and the length of the sessions were determined by the counselors. The counselor or this counseling center that wrote the informed consent form that I reviewed mentioned different lengths of the sessions and how much it would be to cancel for each individual counseling session, because they did couples counseling too, and different stuff like that. So the no outside relationships detail was also mentioned in the one that I reviewed. Their overall goal was to help you. Mine was also, it also mentioned stuff like that, and how you can ask as many questions and ask about their credentials and ask about counselors and stuff. Confidentiality was also very important in my informed consent form. It did mention child abuse. What it did not, and it also mentioned criminal prosecution. But what it did not mention was the HIV and AIDS detail. I thought that was very interesting. So I have a question towards that. Does that mean that if a client does have HIV and AIDS, is their counseling information just available or more available than anybody else? I was a little confused about that, but I thought it was interesting. And I think that was it. But both of our informed consent forms were very similar, except for those few details, and I thought that was very interesting how both of them lacked that information about licensure and restrictions. So something to think about.